welcome to another episode of Gaming Out the Round Table with Maverick, Crystal, and myself, JoJo. Today we're going to talk about how much copying of a format, and especially in gaming, is too much copying. You said a quote earlier off camera, Mav.
Mm-hmm.
Say it one more time.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Cool.
But you got to prompt me better than you said something. I say a lot of things.
Well, you said a quote. I was trying to be specific to the quote.
Oh, yes. I'm going to cheat and just go back in our chat history because I think I actually wrote that down.
Yeah,
we were talking about this. It's a very famous phrase, and there's different ways to say it. I think I can't find it. It doesn't matter. It was something like
the mimicry thing.
Yeah.
Steal my thunder. I was like right there.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, there's a very common phrase that the highest form of a compliment is mimicry.
Mm-hmm.
And so
yeah, in the realm of gaming, it's normal to see a format or a formula copied. The biggest examples obviously are like battle royales, and we're not going to go into like the same names over and over and over, but just battle royales. They get copied, they get tweaked, and they're changed in their own style or skin, you could say, but they're different. And they're different enough to where it doesn't feel like the same thing. And I feel like the ones that are too close kind of get lost in the wash and gradually disappear. But I think it's happening more and more in gaming where it's becoming more than just I'm copying your formula. I'm copying your whole aesthetic game thing. And I think a really good example of it, I didn't mean to cut you off, is Overwatch. I think so many games have copied just the feel of Overwatch that it's almost nauseating. Like,
yeah, one we're excited about that we spoke on a prior podcast, the Marvel one that's coming out. I looked at that, and you guys, the whole time I was showing you the clip, you're like, "That's Overwatch," and I was like, "I don't care. It looks cool, and I like Marvel, right?" So that whole reskinning was, it's theft of their concept, if you will. Something this reminds me of, if we zoom out of gaming for a second, the style, like especially clothing styles, you can practically do it by decade, right? The 1960s, the 1970s, 80s, and so on. They all had different clothing and aesthetic styles that if you go back to movies from that era, you can see for almost 10 years straight, right? There's particular hints. You look at the 90s, it's highlights on the tips of the hair. It's blazer straights on the women's jackets, bright, colorful pants in the late 80s. Everyone looked like they were doing break dancing. Right, exactly, right? So I think what happens to humans in general is we like things, and so naturally we want to mimic them because we like it. And at some point, someone mimics it a little bit better and different, and there's ingenuity in the what I'll call like the sine wave of like the good mimics. And then at the end of that era, it's just so inundated with copies and nothing's original anymore. And people go, "Oh, you're so like 10 years ago," and then move on. I feel like that's the phase we're at in gaming right now. But to your point, it's a little bit worse because we're getting into like straight up copyright, like breaking the law type mimicry. Joe, you had a really good example before we got on to the podcast.
It's the Pokemon. It actually happened this week where Pokemon as an IP and Nintendo together are teaming up and suing Palworld for copyright infringement. Like, on
this is
high
months
level
after Palworld hit the, people who do watch gaming communities and listen to podcasts like this, you may probably remember Palworld was this huge phenomenon. It took like the internet by storm for at least a good month. And then now no one really talks about it too much. And then Nintendo and Pokemon were both like, we have enough evidence now.
Yeah. They had to gather their resources on it. Yeah.
Which is insane. Like, just Pokemon or just Nintendo, if I was being sued, I'd be like, "Oh, I'm in serious trouble."
Yeah.
When both of them are suing me, it's like, yeah, I'm probably gonna lose. I'm probably gonna lose real bad too. And so to your topic, Joe, that's obviously the fine line of like, that is not healthy for the gaming industry. It's not healthy for indie industry. It's theft. And I remember playing. We did a review
Yeah. See, I think the main issue with Power World isn't that it stole Pokemon's concept, right? They could have done a game where you run around and catch things with a ball. Okay. World of Final Fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Prime example. You run around, you fight things, and you catch things with balls.
Yep.
Same thing as Pokemon. The issue with Power World is that they didn't just steal the concept of the game,
Mm-hmm.
which again I feel is okay. Just change
The
some things,
format
make
is
it
what
your
I'm
own.
saying.
Right.
Is like,
Right. The issue is that their pals look mighty close to Pokemon. I mean, you could literally take a Pokemon, put it next to a pal, and they look just slightly different. So much so that people
copy my
all
homework but make
over,
it different.
yeah, all over, social media and stuff like that, were like, oh my god, it's Lucario, and it's not Lucario, it's a pal. So you know
And it's
it's
not one or
really
two
bad.
examples either. I
No.
remember playing the game and looking at the pals and thinking, I need to Google what the original Pokemon looks like because it's so similar that now
Yeah.
I'm like, how are these different? There's the electric type, Electabuzz one. I had to Google that one and like refresh myself.
Bless you.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah,
Thank you.
totally. And even it was pretty big rip. I'm surprised that they released the game and thought, we're
No
good.
problem.
No, there's no problem here.
Yeah.
Nothing's
I'm going
gonna
to play
happen.
devil's advocate on that and say that I don't think they intended for the game to be as big as it was. I think it was like a random
Ooh.
project that they just kind of like slapped together, and for whatever reason, it got a cult classic, like a cult following, and just like exploded. But
That's
if you
because
look at
all of
the
the
initial
Pokemon
base,
fans.
I don't think they intended for it to be as big as it turned into be.
So this reminds me of like something that happened in my recent life. Someone took something. I won't name names because this is like my personal life, and it was mine. And I went up to them and I said something like, "Hey, is that yours?" They go, "Oh, is this yours?" I go, "Does it matter? Is it yours?" Right? Like the answer, no, it wasn't you. The answer was no, it is not yours. The fact that I'm speaking to you is irrelevant. You know this is not yours. It doesn't matter if the owner is around, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not yours. You don't have rights to it. And I feel like my OCD triggered here when you were like, well, they didn't know they were going to be noticed, right? They're flying under the radar. They thought, oh, it's a pet project. In my mind, you're still stealing everything, right? Like, and even worse, if
Because
it
that happens a lot
was,
with Disney as an IP or just as
yeah,
an over company, is they'll let people dabble in their stuff,
mm-hmm.
but the second it hits like a little mark and you're like, beep, you're ours.
Well, it's a cost benefit thing, right? If you sued everyone that stole a big popular idea, then you'd spend all your money suing everybody, right?
Yeah.
I can name people, obviously, I won't. In my personal life that have made something that's probably copyright infringement for their own personal use or whatever. And if that's not a big business or even like a small business, if it's just you in your garage trying something out because you like it, fine. But they were running a business that they're selling on a public platform. You don't get on Steam on accident. You have to make a game that is engineered for it.
Yeah.
And that's not I didn't know what was going to happen. It's you didn't know how well you were going to do. 100% agree.
That's
But
what
you
I wanted
still
to say. At least say like
it would
I
go
don't know
well.
that they completely intended for that like rocket effect.
Yeah, I wonder if they had a meeting where they were like, guys, we need to redesign everything like right now. and the developers are like, dude, are you out of your mind? Like we'd have to remake the whole game.
I do want to know though. So, on a more personal level, what are some games that you guys played that you could tell was like a copy and paste of another game, but where they changed a few things and you were like, "Oh, I love this," even though it's so.
Oh, like in
similar.
a positive way,
right? Like, what are some of the games that you guys saw in a positive light? Because we know Power.
Almost every single tactical RPG, especially the JRPGs that are tactical, they all derive from some of the OGs like Tactics Ogre, Final Fantasy Tactics. I'm sure there's one or two more that were big in the 90s.
StarCraft,
Yep.
Age of Empire.
Yeah, a lot of
World
these
of
games.
Warcraft, even the original,
Yeah.
not the open world, but a lot of people don't know that the World of Warcraft was a tactical RPG. Or was it RPG?
What?
Yeah, it was a tactical game before it became WoW. A
Yeah,
lot of
Wow.
people don't know that.
yeah, it was
I
a
didn't
lot
know
more
that.
like
Yeah.
StarCraft,
Yeah,
right?
it
Where
was StarCraft first, where you had like orcs, humans.
SRPG.
So it was like League of Legends.
No, no, no,
No, it
no,
was
No.
no,
a it
no,
was a
no.
Thinking of
strategy game
something
like
else.
StarCraft. Like it was in the
It
same.
there's a genre of game where you basically build a base.
Yeah,
And,
Ages of Empires.
and yes,
Yeah,
exactly,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
precisely, and that's what it was like when it first
I don't know why my mind said League. I'm thinking of what MOBA.
MOBA.
yeah,
Yeah. So
but
those are really good examples about this topic, right?
Yeah.
We can name several games that are basically the same game.
Okay, but you're naming like old games. What are some
Okay.
current games?
but that's because they
Rude.
fold over into because you can take those styles of game and then they made a Halo edition of it. They made a Gears of War edition of it. So that category, which is why I mentioned when I brought up the topic of a formula,
Yeah.
and not necessarily you're copying the whole game aesthetic. Because I think copying a formula of a game or a format, I think is a better word, a format of a game compared to copying the aesthetic or look of a game
Mm,
is two different horses.
So,
yeah.
First Descendant is a very recent example. Granted, it's the same company in how who they're specifically mimicking, and that's a good point, right? Like, it's a lot healthier if you're mimicking a formula that you made, right? So, the First Descendant is from the people who made Warframe, I believe.
Is
I'm
it?
almost positive.
No.
Google it. Test me
No,
on this.
Warframe is making the other game that hasn't come out. But I think First Descendant is a completely different. But
Next on games.
they
Oh,
used a
I
lot of
was completely off base. So it's not good. Don't do
Yeah.
that. No, but like the idea
Yeah.
is even when we go to review games, and not just us, right? You go to IGN or any other reviewer, and they will almost always say this game is X game
Similar.
and Y game smashed together. It just makes it easier for people to think about it.
Fields of Mystria. I'm going to
Yes.
have a review out on that very soon. That game does a really, really good job of taking things from Animal Crossing and Stardew Valley and creating its own version of those two games in one. So that's a game that I know that I'm very much enjoying right now that has taken bits and parts from other games but still makes it their own game. That just make it original in some way.
But that's why I said the copying. This is something like I'd actually like to hear other people's opinions on it. Whereas, is it good to copy a working format compared to copying like the aesthetics of a game? So, would you rather the format or would you rather the aesthetics? Just as a general question to everybody.
I don't know. It depends. Like, there's a lot of games that I love the aesthetic of, and I think you can't remove the aesthetic sometimes without removing a large piece of the formula.
It's so hard though, right? Because like if I came in and made something with the art style of say
I have an example, which is why I asked.
Hades,
So do I. Yeah.
you know, say I made a game with the same art style as Hades,
Mm-hmm.
people will start saying that you're copying and it's different. I don't know. It's hard. Y'all go ahead and take that one.
So I have one that it's the same series, but they changed their formula while they were doing it, but kept the same aesthetic, and that's Fable.
Mm-hmm.
So Fable had a formula that worked, which is why I loved the original games. But as it progressed, they changed it completely. So even though it had the same feel and sound and look of Fable, they changed the format so much it became a completely different game.
And I have the reverse example. The Disgaea series is a funny JRPG series, and they kept their formula and changed their aesthetic from 2D to 3D. And that change alone, yeah, it was very night and day for me. I played like 4 or 5, and I think 6 went to 3D, and I was like, I hate it. I bought it, I played it, and it's the same game loop. Everything was the same mechanically, but the aesthetic made such a big difference that like I didn't like it anymore. And so that's interesting because you and I had two diametrically opposed examples. So I don't think we can extract it. I think it's going to be a case by case basis.
Yeah.
Well, that pretty much covers the topic for today, actually.
Yeah.
So again, welcome for joining us. I'm
It.
glad this is a
Skip
shorter
it.
one because my brain just went in complete reverse. We had reverse topics, and then my brain went. "Rrr." But thank you for joining us on today's episode of Gaming at the Round Table with Maverick, Crystal, and myself, JoJo.
Take care.